Let's talk now to political analyst for the RIA news agency, Dmitry Barbich. Thank you for joining us here live in the studio. Now, of course, President Obama is facing a tough re-election next year. Could there be a connection?
Well, I think it can be helpful for President Obama. But in general, I would like to say that here in Russia, the vast majority of Russians were not going to shed tears over Osama bin Laden. Because he was not only a threat to the United States, he was in many ways a threat to Russia. But certainly we are not going to also join in this kind of celebration. There is something wrong about it, you know. You should not rejoice when someone is killed.
And in many ways, bin Laden was used to justify US foreign policy abroad, military action. Could there have been a temptation to keep him alive in a strange way?
Well, we can have all sorts of theories, but certainly he was almost made into a sort of a pop symbol. He was used as a sort of a propaganda tool. He was a personification of all the evil of this world. And unfortunately, we see this tradition. The United States always finds someone who personifies the enemy. It was Saddam Hussein, it was Milosevic, now until recently it was bin Laden. So I have this nasty feeling that somehow the United States cannot survive without an enemy. This is not a very good development.
Well, that being the case, with bin Laden out of the way, who will be next then on America's hit list?
Well, I hope that this chain will cease at some moment, because after all, it's not in Judeo-Christian, not in Islamic also tradition to want to have enemies. If you need enemies to keep yourself informed, that doesn't tell a lot of good things about you. But certainly the situation in Libya is far from being resolved. The conflict in Afghanistan is far from being resolved. The Iraqi problem may spring up again at any moment. There is a continued rivalry with China, and somehow the United States sometimes even managed to alienate some countries which could be allies, for example, Russia. I'm sure that all the controversies that we have between Russia and the United States, they are all artificial. I don't see the real base for a disagreement.
You mentioned Libya there. I mean, it could be a case of history repeating itself. When you look back in the 80s, the US, in effect, raised bin Laden, I suppose, in the sponsoring the Mujahideen war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Is there a sense of déjà vu here?
Well, I think to a certain extent, yes, because in the 70s and early 80s, when the United States financed the so-called voluntaries coming from the Middle East to fight in Afghanistan, the personification of evil was the Soviet Union and Brezhnev and Andropov. So this over-concentration over an image of an evil leader who is an enemy, it may play a bad joke over the United States also, because it's clear that the problem in Libya is not just Gaddafi. He's an unsavory character and he doesn't look very clever on television. But obviously the problem is not in him, but the problem is that a very big chunk of Libyan society does not want to be ruled by this so-called opposition, which was recognized by France and then other Western countries so hastily.
Okay, we'll leave it there for now. Dmitry Barbich, thank you, as always, for joining us here live on our team.